I have noticed over many years of teaching spiritual teachings that people have a tendency to separate the normal everyday life from their spiritual practices. That they have a tendency to think that, well, here I meditate, but when I get in the marketplace, then it's dog eat dog. I met a man up in Canada a couple of years ago who told me that when he was out in business, then it was too bad that he had to serve mammon, it was too bad that he had to work for money, but at least when he got home, he was able to shut the door on all that. He was able to think, to forget about the money he had just put in the bank. He was able to sit down and light his incense and then think about God and devote his life to God. That home was his ashram and the two worlds didn't touch. And I was thinking, what a pity. Because in fact, the whole purpose of the spiritual life is not just to take us out of the world, but to bring God into the world, to bring God into our lives, to learn how to transform our work, our relationships, our play, everything that we do to help to make it more spiritual. Now, what do we mean by spiritual? We tend to create a sort of a nebulous and altogether artificial image when we think of spirituality. We think of God way up there in the heavens. We think of spirituality as being something where we chant with a very devotional and sort of pious attitude. We tend to think of it as something that you do in church. We don't understand that spirituality is a living and breathing part of daily life. And this is the message that I would like to share with you this evening. Spirituality versus perhaps religion. I remember a discussion that I had with a man a few years ago who claimed to be an atheist. In a sense, there is no such thing as an atheist, because what we believe isn't only what our minds form as ideas in our heads. It's also what we believe with our lives. It's what we believe with our experience. And I'll tell you what I mean by this little illustration. This man was claiming, as I say, to be an atheist. And I was trying to help him to see that his ideas about God weren't necessarily the only definition of God, that if he could change his definition, that maybe he would be able to come up with some idea that he could recognize and accept. Because most people feel that God is some sort of a form, a policeman up there in the sky directing the traffic down here, sort of cackling gleefully when you make a mistake and saying, "Ha, you go to hell for eternity." An angry God, a jealous God, a God full of mean and human passions. And yet, if we understand that all of us aspire to something higher than ourselves, all of us aspire to some kind of goodness, even the worst criminal has within him some kind of longing for something better, because God is in all of us, and there is some part within us that won't let go of that faith. We all know that there's some potential that we haven't yet realized. There was a wonderful story from the life of St. Francis. There were 3 men who were ruffians, outlaws, had been responsible for creating all kinds of outrages against the good townfolk of Assisi. And one day these townfolk just had it. And in outrage and fury, they went after these bandits with pitchforks and knives and whatever they could come up with in the way of weaponry. And these 3 men, running for sanctuary, ran to the nearest monastery, because in those days, if you went into a church, then on the altar nobody could touch you. And so they thought, maybe in this house of God we'll be safe. St. Francis wasn't there at the time. He was off on some mission, and he had left the monastery in charge of one of his subordinate monks. And this monk was absolutely outraged that these bandits, these evil people, should dare to present themselves in a place of worship. And he told them to be gone, and they left with great curses and anger. And when St. Francis returned, the monk, in great self-righteousness and anger, told him how these evil men had dared to present themselves in this holy place. And St. Francis was indeed properly indignant. But he was indignant with the monk, not with these bandits. And he ordered the monk to go find those bandits and cast himself on his knees before them and say that my brother Francis has asked you to come and receive his hospitality, which this man did. And he found these bandits and invited them on St. Francis's behalf to come to the monastery. And when they came, St. Francis's first words were, "My brothers, why do you live the way you do? It isn't making you happy." Well, nobody had ever spoken to them like that. To call them brothers, to speak in terms of their happiness when everybody else was concerned with the misery that they were causing these other people. And it really took them aback. And he started talking to them in such a way as to remind them of some sort of vision that each one of them held for his own higher potential. He reminded them of something that they had perhaps lost touch with. To the extent, this is a true story, to the extent that they became totally converted. They left not only their way of life, they entered the monastery as monks. And they ended up living very holy lives and died in sanctity, all because one person had reminded them of a potential that everybody else had sought to bury in their imprecations and hatred. So we all have this within us. And this friend of mine that I was talking about, first of all, I was trying to show him some broader definition of God that would make it possible for him to accept God, but he wouldn't buy it at all, because he kept having that idea in his mind, no, he was an atheist, a dedicated, true, and tried atheist. And so I just left the subject. There's no point in trying to convert people against their will. But we were driving somebody home. It was a group of us in the car, and one of the people in the car was a young girl, about 16 years old, who during the time that we were driving her to her home was claiming in a very cynical voice not to believe in love. And I suppose some boyfriend had let her down or something. At that age, it's hard to imagine anyone being yet totally cynical. But anyway, she was as cynical as she was capable of being at her age. And as we let her out at her home, this boy, after we'd let her out, turned to me, this atheist, and he said, "Can you imagine that, not believing in love?" And I said, "And you call yourself an atheist?" You see, let's get rid of these labels. Spirituality is something that doesn't have a label. It's simply a fact of life. And it's that dimension that I want to discuss this evening. An atheist who helps somebody across the street, or helps a dying person, or offers any kind of love and support to another human being, is doing a spiritual deed. He doesn't have to call it a Christian deed. We speak of Christian humility, and I don't know why. What makes it less humble if it's a Buddhist who's being humble? Why put a label on it? I think it's time that we got rid of these labels and started to realize that there are certain attitudes which, if we endorse and embrace, lift our consciousness. And if we stay away from, somehow we are the ones who suffer. I had an experience a few years ago in which some people hurt me very deeply. And I certainly felt the temptation to be angry and to resent how they had treated me. And I had to face this simple fact, which I would like to share with you because it's a wonderful discovery that I made. First, am I happier when I hate or when I love? Obviously, I'm happier when I love. And why should I allow anybody else to place a condition on my happiness? If I am happier loving than hating, if I am happier giving love than reacting with resentment, then it's not my problem how they treat me. It's my problem how I react. It's my problem the kind of thoughts I put out. I choose to love. purely and simply because I'm happier when I love. And I don't see why I should suffer twice. Sure, they caused me suffering. Why should I increase that suffering? Why should I double it? Why, as I say, should I suffer twice by, in addition to feeling that pain, feeling resentment for the pain? At least I have control over how I respond. At least I can choose to love. I can choose to be a friend. I can choose to forgive. And with that attitude, I found that I gained overnight such strength in myself, such assurance that I can go through this world absolutely free. I don't have to be anybody's slave. I don't have to be a slave to the way they act toward me. I can choose to be happy. One time, Paramhansa Yogananda, my guru, said to somebody, if you choose to be happy, no one in the world will be able to make you unhappy. If you choose to be unhappy, no one in the world is going to be able to make you happy. And so it is that I want to speak about spiritualizing your relationships in this broader concept. I do believe in God. I do believe that there is a being to whom you can pray and that you can get answers. I don't have to say I believe it. I know it because I've experienced it. But I don't mean to force my knowledge on you until you have that knowledge. And therefore I will say, I believe. Because I would like to offer it rather than drive it down your throats. And with that offering I will say, I believe that there is something higher. I believe that there is something that we can reach out toward, that we can pray to, that responds to our prayer. And yet, at the same time, I don't want to call it anything. If you're not ready to call it anything, all I would like to say is that if you will reach out toward a broader experience of life, then you are the one who will gain. There isn't some God up there who's pleased when you pat him on the head and say, sure, I believe in you. He couldn't care less. Except, of course, that he gives you his love, and the one thing he doesn't have is your love in return. In that sense, of course he cares. But he doesn't care in the sense that he needs you. You need him. Or you need your own higher self. And for your own good, you need to include in your life any way of defining your directions in such a way as to embrace a greater love rather than a lesser love, a greater identity rather than a smaller identity, a greater joy rather than thinking only me and mine. And so with that thought, what is the one thing in our lives that gives us the greatest satisfaction or the greatest pain? It isn't our jobs. It isn't our work. It isn't our talents and hobbies. It isn't our travels. It's people, isn't it? You, in your response to other people, can determine whether you get the best out of life or the worst out of life. And I don't think there's a person in this room who will challenge me when I say that the greatest happiness that you have experienced as a human being, I'm not talking of your experiences in meditation and your experiences in feeling God's presence and so on, but your greatest happiness surely as a human being, as opposed to the soul in you, is in your relationship with other people. And surely the greatest pain that you've experienced also has come from other people. And I believe I have some right, because of my own experience in life, and perhaps each one of you would, if you look deeply enough in your heart, have the same right to make a very strong statement that if we can learn how to relate with ourselves, in ourselves, and to other people, then these associations that we have become a marvelous opportunity for growth. When you look in a mirror, you see how you look to other people. When you look in a mirror, you can see whether you're standing straight or crooked. You can see whether you're taking care of yourself properly or not. Similarly, other people offer back to us mirrors. They are each one of them tests to help us to understand whether we have really grown in our self-understanding, in our inner selves, or whether we have a lot yet to learn. I'm reminded of a very wise statement that one of the Catholic saints, Saint Therese of Lisieux, made. When, in the monastery of which she was at that time the novice mistress, some of the nuns, some of the older nuns, who had lost their vocation, presumably, and didn't have the courage to leave the monastery, and so were taking out their frustration on the others, and they would make very harsh statements, they would be insulting, they would wash clothes in the company of others in such a way as to splash soap suds and water in the others' eyes and so on. It seems strange that in a monastery you'd get people like that, but after all, people are people. And so the younger novices said to Saint Therese of Lisieux, "Why? We've come to this house of God. Why here, of all places, should we have to put up with people like that?" And her response was absolutely a classic. She said, "If we didn't have such people, it would behoove us to go out and find them and bring them here." Because you need people like that to help you to understand whether you have really gained in compassion, in tolerance, in acceptance of other people as they are, in freedom in yourself to reach the point where no one can place a condition on your own peace of mind. This is a priceless lesson to learn. And if you can have all sorts of wonderful philosophy and everything is a dream and it's all Brahman and it's all just nothing exists except God, and you come up with glorious Sanskrit sayings like Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, and Tattvamasi, thou art that, and all these lovely things, and then somebody spills coffee on your tie and you get angry, you haven't yet learned the lesson. In fact, in India, they used to have the idea that people, until they reach a certain level of spiritual refinement, shouldn't even be taught these higher teachings of everything being a dream of Brahman and nothing being real except this infinite consciousness, because they misuse it. For example, I have actually seen people in India do this, that, well, so I cheat my customers, but it's all a dream anyway, so... Yogananda said that unless and until you can learn to love and win the love of others, you cannot expect to win God's love. He again, actually it was a disciple of his, Sister Gyanamata, who said, "Your religion is tested in the cold light of day. It's all very well to feel peaceful in meditation, but if you can't bring that peace out to deal in the marketplace, if you lose your peace when somebody insults you, if you lose your cool when things don't go right, or if you're driving down the freeway muttering at all those lousy drivers, then don't kid yourself that your meditations are just fine. Don't kid yourself that God's pleased with you. Until you're pleased with yourself on the freeway, until you can carry your peace with you wherever you are, until you can meet the tests of life, you haven't met the test of meditation and of the spiritual path either." Yogananda said something else very interesting. Until you can have one perfect human relationship, you cannot yet know God. That was a very interesting statement. It doesn't have to be with a spouse. It can be with your guru. It can be with a friend. It can be with somebody of the same sex. It doesn't matter. It's not a sexual thing we're talking about. But unless you can learn to have a deep relationship, a deeply satisfying relationship, a relationship where you realize that meeting of two people on the deepest level is meeting of two souls, a meeting where words aren't important. Recently, Brother Mokshananda of the Self-Realization Fellowship died, and I attended his funeral. There aren't too many people left in the work whose funerals I would want to attend, but he was very dear to me, and I'm very, very glad that I got to go. And in fact, I really felt his presence in that funeral service. It was as if he were sharing the love that we poured out and that I poured out as a friend. But I remember one time he and I were in seclusion together out at 29 Palms. And being in seclusion, we didn't speak at all. In fact, the only words we uttered the entire week that we were there together were that he had left some god-awful looking mess in the frying pan on the stove for me, And I looked at it and couldn't even recognize what it was. So I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Spinach." And that was our conversation that whole week. But you know, people meet most deeply in silences. And we were so close after that week and other times when it wasn't our words. I know that probably you've all experienced this, that there are times, in fact, I think that the real proof of whether people are really close together is if they can be silent together in each other's company and be comfortable with each other's company. To be silent, and like this, of course, is not what I'm talking about, but to have that feeling of comfort in each other's presence, to have that feeling of being able to commune with each other, with your wife, to be able to just hold hands, or just sit and not say anything, and yet feel that there is this exchange of magnetism and love and consciousness. This is bringing love, this is bringing relationships to a level where it's possible really to spiritualize them. And what do we mean ultimately by spiritualizing them? Where you can find God communing with God through the windows of these two human egos. You see, each one of us is an expression of something much more. We are all manifestations of the infinite, like waves on the ocean. Those waves are all manifestations of one ocean, but each wave looks separate. Or, to use another illustration, because the waves are so fickle in their movement that it may be difficult to think of them as something separate. You don't have time to define them before they change, they move, they disappear. So take an island. John Donne said, "No man is an island." And of course it's true, because even though we are, in a sense, irrevocably separate from one another, and even in the most intimate of human relationships, there is always that separation. We come into this world alone, we go from this world alone. There is always that aura of solitude that surrounds human beings that they cannot break as long as they are functioning only on an ego level. Yet, as islands are separated by the sea, yet the earth underneath them unites, doesn't it? And similarly, you, in your ego, are separate from others, even those who are closest to you. But in your soul, you are already one with them, because we are all manifestations of the same Spirit. Each one of our little egos is just a little vortex of energy and consciousness that is drawing things to a center for a while, saying, I, mine, me, mine. And we build up more and more this thought of getting things from me and dragging things from the universe to satisfy my little desire and my little interest. And so it is that we have this thought, reinforced by the fact that here are the perimeters of my body, and obviously you're not me. In an outward way, my ego has a certain identity, it has a personality, and so on. So it seems as if each one of us has a sort of enduring reality. And yet, there is a level of consciousness which a few people have achieved, and which all of us achieve to a lesser degree, where in losing consciousness of ourselves as separate from life, we enter into a kind of mainstream of life where there is real sharing. You see a beautiful sunset, and you forget yourself for a while. And in that moment of forgetfulness, you become the sunset. In that moment of listening to beautiful music, suddenly you are that music. When you can lose your self-consciousness, even for a moment, suddenly your identity expands. And it may actually expand to the extent where you really feel the thoughts and consciousness of other people. Have you ever had that experience where you feel yourself in others? Surely you've had to some extent. This experience can become more and more the more you can dissolve that sense of ego identity. Ramakrishna used the illustration of the onion. He said, discovering who you are, or even you could, in your meditation, sit there and ask yourself, who am I? And bit by bit you will say, well, I'm not just a man. There's a level of consciousness within me that is neither male nor female. I'm not just an American. There's a level of consciousness within me that doesn't speak a language and that doesn't identify itself with place and time. I'm not just an artist or a businessman. This is just a game I'm playing. There's something more. And you get rid of these layers, and it's like peeling an onion. At the end of the peeling of the onion, what have you got left? Nothing. And so there comes, in this process of self-discovery, more and more freedom from self-definition, more and more discovery that the real self that we're finding is that self which beats in the hearts of all. And the more you have that, the more there comes into you a sense of kinship with all life. I've had people, for example, sit down and practice Kriya with me, to let me feel whether they're doing it rightly or not. I can actually feel the current in their bodies as if it were in my body. I can tell when they're doing it right, because it's in me that they're doing it in a way. When you try to identify yourself with other people, when you try, in other words, to spiritualize your relationships and not to come at them as, well, here am I, Joe Brown, and there are you, Susie Queen, and therefore we'll try to find some way of communing with each other through words. Emerson put it beautifully when he said, men descend to meet. We meet on a human level talking like this, but even in a lecture, this is something that Yogananda taught us to do. Don't just talk. Don't just give people words. Try to give them your vibrations. When you mix with people, try to give them who you really are inside. Try to make them feel your consciousness. Make them feel your vibrations. I had a really interesting experience in Ananda some months ago. I hadn't actually tried it to this extent before. I was sitting and meditating with the group, with the community, and I thought, well, let me try to meditate not only with them, but in a sense for them. In other words, I tried to feel that I was in all their consciousness, and that as I was meditating, I was lifting them all in my meditation. And several people told me that they had a much deeper meditation that way. Try to bless people. You may say, well, who am I to bless anybody? Who are you to bless anybody? You are God Himself. That's who you are. Sure, you don't look like it. You look in the mirror and you say, is that God? No, that isn't God. That's not the God I'm talking about. But deep inside you is God. And that is finally your reality. No wave can say, I am the ocean, but every wave has a right to say that the ocean is my whole reality. That it is the ocean that has become this body and this ego. The more you relate to people in that way, the more you will find wonderful things happening to you. You will find, for one thing, that total strangers will be attracted to you. You'll find that wherever you go in the world, you will have friends. They won't know why they want to be your friend, but the reason they want to be your friend is that you are relating to them on that level which they themselves want. A fascinating thing in the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, something that's sort of coming out more and more as I meet people who just had a little contact with him, is the impact that just seeing him in the street had on their lives. One man recently, he was a gas station attendant up at Nevada City, and some of our people from the community, from Ananda community, drove into the gas station and asked him to fill her up. No very great spiritual meeting. And this man just happened to look through the window and he saw Yogananda's photograph there. And he was a big, husky fellow, probably 250 pounds or so. You wouldn't expect sentiment out of such a person. As soon as he saw that picture, he began to weep. He said, I had a gas station down in Los Angeles, and this man came into my gas station. I never knew who he was. Who is he? Just seeing him changed my life. I've never been able to forget that face. Some woman told me that she was walking with her husband and she saw Yogananda through the window of a restaurant. And she said, that's the most spiritual face I've ever seen. How could one person have that kind of impact on other people? Because he knows himself. There's a song I've written, I should have sung it earlier. A line from it goes, who knows himself knows all men as brothers. The more you get to know who you are, the more you see that in everybody else. You don't see just personality. You regret when they don't live up to their potential, but at the same time you see that there is that potential there, that every one of them is a child of God. Ananda Ma, a great woman saint that Yogananda wrote about in his autobiography of a yogi, I've spent time with her in India, and there was one time when she was just walking in the countryside and she stopped by under a tree near a village, and some villager passed by and was attracted and just stood there and talked with her for a while, and before he knew it, somebody else came and he was attracted. Then somebody went and started to tell other people about this total stranger sitting under a tree outside their village. By the time she'd been there an hour, there were 1,000 people gathered around her. And then it came time for her to get up and leave, and they were weeping as if they were losing their own mother. How is it possible for somebody, a total stranger, to awaken that kind of love? The less you have of yourself, the more you have of God. I remember a lovely episode that happened to me years ago. When I lived at Mount Washington, I had a window behind my desk. And through the window, I would enjoy looking into the garden and looking at the greenery and the flowers and the trees and the shade. One day, there was a big storm and mud was splattered on the window, and I no longer could enjoy looking through the window because of all the mud, but I was too busy to get out there and clean the window, so I had to sort of endure this unpleasant view for a couple of weeks until I finally got a free Saturday and got out there and cleaned the windows and everything. And after cleaning the window, partly the relief at having had to put up with it for so long, but I looked at it and I said, "Oh, what a beautiful window." Then I smiled because I realized that the only thing that made it beautiful was that I couldn't see it. The only thing that makes a person beautiful is if you don't see him. Like the clouds at sunset. When they become beautiful, it isn't the clouds that are beautiful, it's the sun shining on the clouds. What makes us beautiful? When we can get rid of this sense of I and mine and allow ourselves to be windows through which the divine can shine. And every one of us has that potential, more than potential. Every one of us has that duty, because you are a child of God, and your only purpose in living in this world is to find out who and what you are. But I'm talking about relationships tonight because we've talked a great deal on the path, not just I, but many other teachers, about practicing yoga and doing breathing exercises and meditating and communing with God. And I find that too often people don't make this teaching real in their daily lives. Or I found another thing happening, that they think, well, I'm a yogi now and I'm on the spiritual path now and I'm not supposed to feel certain things, whether it be anger or jealousy or lose your cool or whatever it might be. I'm not supposed to feel it, and therefore I don't. Now, is that being real? What you do when you don't face something that's in you is push it down, suppress it, and it's going to come out in some other way that you can't recognize, in a totally irrational way. And because of this kind of suppression, we end up, all of us, being slightly crazy. Every one of us has some sort of aberration until we can get together enough honesty to see ourselves as we are. You know, when you see a fault in yourself, instead of thinking, oh no, but that's not me, oh I'm not like that, or instead of feeling badly because you've discovered that you really are a lot worse than you thought you were in some particular context, do you realize that this is a wonderful opportunity and you should congratulate yourself? Good, I found a fault, now I can do something about it. You have it anyway. Don't kid yourself. Don't say, oh no, but I'm not like that. Say, well, maybe I am. Maybe this is an opportunity to learn. You can't get rid of something until you face it. Then don't dwell on it. Once you've seen it and faced it, then you can take the energy from that and put it into something more, something higher. You don't get rid of darkness in a room by beating at it with a stick. You get rid of it by turning on the light. And so I don't mean to sit there and wallow in your errors. Even sin has no other meaning etymologically except error. We all err in one way or another. All I'm asking you to do is recognize the error so that then you can take the energy from it and put it into something else. But if you refuse to recognize it, then of course the energy remains there. You haven't dealt with it. To see yourself as you are and forget it. To see yourself as you are and say, all right, but I choose not to be that way anymore. And even if you fail 1,000 times, you've got eternity. There's lots of time. Just keep trying. Never give up. Your relationships with people help to make these things real. Your relationship with yourself, that's the most important relationship of all, really. Get to like yourself. Whoever you are, there are certainly things about you that you don't like, but there are other things that you do like. Concentrate on your strengths. Don't concentrate on your weaknesses. I found this one of the most invaluable tools in building the community. I didn't waste time with the negative people. I concentrated on those who really wanted to help make a go of it. And by giving them strength, we gradually created a vortex of positive energy that made everything begin to blossom. Do that with yourself. Sure, you've got qualities you don't like, but you can't fight all your battles right at once. You may see a fault that is very big, but if it's too big to handle, just put it on a shelf. Say, okay, I'll get to that one in time. First of all, practice. Let me get stronger. When I've become a good warrior, then I'll take that one on. But in the meantime, fight battles you can win. And you will find that bit by bit you do develop that strength. So get to like yourself and say, well, but I can't like my selfishness. I can't like my jealousy. How can I like myself when I get angry all the time? Okay, but what about things in you that you do like? There's got to be something, or you'd commit suicide. Within you, there is certainly something that is lovable. If only the fact that you're a child of God. There has to be. Concentrate on those strengths. Concentrate on learning to excuse yourself, to forgive yourself. That doesn't mean to just be nonchalant about your weaknesses. Understand that you will suffer until you get rid of them. But love those qualities within you that can help you to grow. Now, one of the things that can help you with that is your relationship with others. They are, you know, I had an interesting experience in Rome the other day, a few weeks ago. There were a couple of ladies. I gave a Kriya Yoga initiation, and there were a couple of ladies there who, they wanted very much to come, but they had babies, and so they asked, could I bring the baby into the initiation? Well, I couldn't handle that one, because this is a very quiet thing. And I said, well, better if you can put them in the other room. Well, they did. But those babies fed each other misery. One cried, the other cried louder, which made the first one cry even louder. And it was impossible to carry on that Kriya Yoga initiation, so I had to have them bring the babies and sit just outside the door and just so they could be a part of it. But it was so interesting to me to think of it, that here these babies felt totally abandoned and absolutely miserable, and yet the mothers didn't feel miserable because they knew that they were right there to take care of the baby when it needed it. And so also we often feel abandoned by God because we don't know that He's just in the next room. He's right there, He can pick us up at any moment if we just call to Him in the right way. God is there. God is in your life. And in your relationship with other people, I've always found this, that when I didn't have love from others, it was not because they didn't give it to me, because I didn't give it to them. My duty is not to go around looking for somebody to love me. My duty is to love them. Think in terms of what will help them, not how can I get even with them if they hurt you. What will do the most good? Concentrate on becoming a cause, not an effect. And this is what relationships can teach us to do, perhaps better than anything else, better than meditation. Your relationships are a very, very important part of your meditation, a very, very important part of your spiritual growth. And the more you can come at them in that way, try to be an instrument of blessing to others. Try to see when you get upset by anybody, what is it in yourself that makes you upset? Your problem is, how do you change yourself to reach the point where you can take whatever comes? You'll find something very interesting, that when you start putting out the right energy, you begin getting the right kinds of friends. you'll find that instead of getting people who do pull you down, you'll begin to get wonderful friends. To be a true friend means to find true friends everywhere, to be able to attract true friends from past incarnations, to be able to find those friends above all who will help you to grow spiritually. And that's what it's really finally all about when we're talking of spiritual teachings, to find those relationships and to build on those relationships that can help us to grow spiritually. Friends can be the greatest opportunity you have. And there's another thing that's the hallmark of our present age, and whether you take it as going into the Aquarian age or whether you take it the way my guru's guru put it, Sri Yukteswar, of going from the Kali Yuga into Dwapara Yuga, in all ways it does seem to come down to one basic change, and that is that we're getting away from form and becoming conscious of energy. We're aware that matter is no longer solid, that matter is energy. We're getting away from dogmatism and institutionalism, and we're coming into more and more this thought that you can't put love in a church, it's everywhere. You can't put truth in a creed, it's everywhere. And nobody has a monopoly on truth. Then there's this other dimension too, that those things that will be the most helpful now and in the future for our spiritual practices will be those things that help us to become aware of ourselves and of our directions in terms of energy. That would include pranayama, exercises that make us more aware of energy, energization exercises, doing the yoga postures with the consciousness of the energy that we're bringing into play, meditating and directing energy, not just sort of hoping that God will do it for us, but putting our energy into it too. In many, many ways, I find this truth coming to the fore. And I think that relationships is simply another aspect of that we're needing to see. Now, here we're faced with an age where marriage as an institution appears to be, if not on the rocks, at least in pretty shallow water. And we find an amazing number of divorces and an amazing number of marriages that are very shaky. And we almost cheer when we find a happy marriage, which is pretty pathetic, isn't it? I have been brought up in that kind of home where I've never known my parents to have an argument. And I say this to people and they're just aghast. They've never heard of such a thing. And I think that if we look at it in the negative way of what's breaking up, it's the same thing as, oh, we see all the old institutions breaking up, we see all the old forms crumbling, and it looks bad. But if you see that actually we're moving toward new definitions, this is what a book of mine called Crises in Modern Thought was trying to do. Looking at all the facts that science has discovered that make people feel that there's no value in life anymore, that there's no meaning in life, that everything is just accident and there can't be any God because there's no purpose, and so on. And I've taken those same scientific discoveries and merely reinterpreted them. And suddenly you find that what they've done is break old conceptions in order to give us broader conceptions. And this, I feel, is going to happen in relationships and in marriage and so on too. That it's not really a destruction of anything. It's merely breaking narrow definitions in order for us to see a broader reality. For example, in marriage, one of the things that makes marriage, in fact probably the most important thing in marriage, that makes it a divine institution as opposed to just copulation, is the opportunity for spiritual growth, the opportunity to have such a commitment to another person that your happiness depends on sharing that person's happiness too. It's easy enough to love strangers because there's no commitment there. But to have that love to somebody that under all circumstances you have to keep giving that love, this requires a great deal of self-discipline and results in a great deal of personal growth. In other words, to expand our sympathies to include even one other person is very wholesome for people. If we're going to grow spiritually at all, in the last analysis, only thing that we need to do is break the ego. Break down the barrier that ego creates, is what I really mean to say. And understand that our self is a part of the self of all. and to love another person, and then when children come, to love them. This is why I wrote that new book of mine, How to Spiritualize Your Marriage, to emphasize this point. There are other aspects to marriage that are equally perhaps helpful, but this is the one I wanted to emphasize here. And yet, what we find is, and this has been typical of our culture until now, and in a way it's been almost worse in the last few decades, is that once we've expanded our love to include one other person or 4 other people with children or something like that, the door closes. And suddenly it's us 4 and no more. Well, then where is the growth? You're loving this person for what he can do for you. That's not love, that's self-love. Really, to understand any kind of love is to understand that the nature of love is to expand. And to be able to love one other person should be a doorway to loving more and more and more. And so that kind of expansion of awareness is what I think people are coming to now. No 2 people can be all in all to each other, to one another, unless they're exceptionally stupid. There's bound to be a need to experience, and I'm not talking of marital infidelity, I'm talking of just plain love. We've got to learn to love everybody. We've got to be able to love specifically, and that's what marriage can help us to do, and friendships can help us to do. But that specificity in our love should then reach out to embrace the whole human race, the animals, the plants, everything. And only then can love become divine love. So I really feel that we're on the eve of great and wonderful changes, but right now we're on the wrong side of the mountain. We don't yet see what's on the other side, and it looks pretty bleak. Once you get over there, you're going to see the sun shining, and I think that the next century is going to be a wonderful century. This century is wonderful, but in a different way. A wonderful opportunity to learn.